Minister, a stark and unacceptable fact is that even if you are in receipt of the maximum SUSI grant, which would give you €6,115, you would not be able to afford the student accommodation in UCD, even the cheapest and supposedly most affordable, where rates vary from €6,900 a year up to €10,745. What are you going to do to make sure that on publicly funded colleges and universities, and more generally for the student population, that they have actually affordable accommodation?
Yes, I want to thank Deputy Boyd Barrett for raising this question. I think it has been a significant week in terms of changing the government's policy to student accommodation. So this week, I went to government with the proposal that for the first time the state will use taxpayers' money to help build college-owned, publicly owned college accommodation. I have said in this House before that I think we've been too reliant on the private market in relation to this. We are now changing that policy. 3 projects in Maynooth, in Galway and in Limerick have now been approved as part of that. There's 5 universities that have active planning permission. There are 3 of them. UCD and DC are the other 2. We're engaging with those 2 to try and get them over the line as well. We've also provided €1 million to the technological universities to do a similar exercise to bring in the expertise, the capabilities to come up with their own plans. But the process has changed this week. The policy has changed this week. We're open for business to receive applications from publicly funded institutions where we'll bridge that viability gap. And viability gap, that's a bit jargony, isn't it? But I mean, the viability gap is effectively what the difference that we need to make up to make sure the accommodation can be built and can be affordable. And what I have said this week very clearly and what the government has agreed to is any money we invest, the accommodation that needs to be provided in return for that investment has to be below market rate, has to be €6,000 or less, which is in line with or slightly below the maximum SUSI grant. So that is the new policy that we now have in place. It has resulted in almost 700 units that wouldn't otherwise have been built, that had been stalled for quite a few years. Now we'll be able to commence, we'll be able to go ahead in 2023. But I actually think the bigger picture, the bigger piece, the bigger win for the sector, for students, is that we now have a new approach to student accommodation. It can't come fast enough, I know that. I do think it will make a real difference though in making sure that we have more college-owned accommodation. And my challenge now to every university and college across Ireland is send in your plans, get ready, because the excuse, or indeed the truth, that the government's not providing funding for student accommodation is no longer true.
For student accommodation is of course welcome, but the devil is in the detail. Will it be genuinely affordable? And how much of this new accommodation, because it's only the money that we put in that then will be so supposedly affordable, the rest will be unaffordable. Does the Minister know, for example, that UCD every year give the maximum increase legally allowed, the 2%, every single year? They increase the rent on the students, despite the fact that we have an affordability crisis. That the new accommodation built out in UCD is going to be €1,300. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. That's the same as market rates. So we cannot have a situation where the national universities and publicly funded universities are charging these extortionate rates. So a little bit of affordable, and we're not even clear of the detail, will it genuinely be affordable? But even if what you're saying, 6,000, it eats up virtually all of the grant, and currently there's not a single piece of accommodation in UCD, as an example, that would be fully covered by the maximum SUSI grant.
You may have heard me say earlier, I mean, there is a supply issue. We know if you take Maynooth University as an example of just the figures that I have in my head, for every 1 student who got a student accommodation bed on campus, there were 6 others who looked for one. So there was a demand this year for student accommodation at current rates that could not be met. And we have to ramp up the supply. We genuinely do. I do take the point on affordability though, because I've no interest in student accommodation being open with great fanfare that isn't affordable to the bulk of students in this country. What I'm trying to do is find a mechanism that allows us, the state, give money to universities as in compliance with state aid rules and all of that sort of stuff, which we do need to be in compliance with, that enables projects to go ahead, but also enables accommodation to be provided that is affordable. Now, the debate around what is affordable is somewhat of a subjective concept, but there are different ways, and you've raised this with me in this House before, there are different ways the state can help people meet the cost of the rent if the unit is built. But if the unit isn't built, we're having an academic conversation, pardon the pun. So the key thing here is actually build the stuff and then actually make sure that we can use lots of tools, including student grant, including other suggestions you've made, to try and help students meet the cost of rent.
Just on that point, because until we do the catch-up and provide the sort of purpose-built student affordable accommodation on, university lands, and the idea that state aid rules is slightly worrying, by the way, kick in when it comes to public universities. These are public universities and public goods. But anyway, I'll leave that aside. The vast majority of students are still therefore prey to what's going on in the wider private rental market. And indeed, many of them licensees and digs and so on. One of the things the UCD Students' Union this morning were again saying is we need some minimum protections for people in licensee arrangements who are facing short notice evictions and all sorts of things, and basically have no rights and protections whatsoever. And they also asked that they would like to meet not just yourself, but also the Minister for Housing, given that many students are affected by that wider rental accommodation and housing crisis, to address the issues that students are facing in terms of the accommodation and housing crisis.
Minister, to conclude.
I've had a number of engagements at UCD Students' Union. I've no issue meeting them, and I've certainly asked the Minister for Housing to, and I'm sure he'll have no issue meeting them as well. The reference to state aid rules related to the fact that there could be private developers saying, well, actually, I could build that too. I'm trying to change the model here. I genuinely believe we need to have more publicly funded institutions owning their own accommodation. I really believe that. I think we saw in COVID the benefit of that, actually, to be quite honest, where people in student accommodation were able to, in college own, were getting refunds quicker in some cases, where others at all weren't. So we do need to build more college-owned student accommodation. I do think in a housing emergency, it's not acceptable that you have publicly owned land with planning permissions that haven't been activated. This week we have activated 3 of them. There were 5 not activated. We have activated 3 of them. There are 2 large ones, UCD and DCU. They are genuinely engaging very constructively. I thank them for that. And we're trying to find a way forward. But we do now have a new policy framework. We can rightly debate the details of it. But the approach we're taking to student accommodation now is different, I believe is better, is overdue, and I think will make a real difference.